I was anti-war. Both my parents were ministers of the church, and they didn't want me to go to war, and so I reported, and um, I had 30 days, and so we have a Naval Air Reserve base in Orange County, close to where I grew up in Newport Beach. And so I went to the gate at the Naval Air Reserve and said, I just got drafted and I'm a pilot. I was already a private pilot licensed when I got drafted. And that gave me certain capabilities within the draft system to designate what my work uh, number was going to be, what my assignment was going to be. So as soon as they found out I was a pilot, they uh, had me get in touch with the Naval Air Reserve. They approved me and signed me up for a 6 year program. Same as being drafted, you got a 6 year commitment, but
Yeah.
um, I had to go to reserve meetings the first year, 65 to 66, and then I reported for active duty to my helicopter assault marine carrier. We had a battalion of Marines aboard for the combat mission.
So you go into the Naval Reserve in 1965, and you serve your tour in Vietnam with the Navy, and of course we'll talk about that. Um, Now you said that your parents were opposed to war. Were your parents pacifist, or was it the Vietnam War that they were opposed to?
No, they were pacifists. They were both ministers of the church. And so, they're a very peacekeeping type of people. And no, it wasn't just Vietnam.
Okay. Did you did you share that outlook?
I did. I grew up with that outlook, and I was so involved in school activities back then. I mean, I was drafted in my second year of college, and I was already freshman class president, all American swimmer, varsity crew team, student body committee chair. I mean, I had all these things going on, and all of a sudden I get drafted.
Wow.
And so it caught me caught me by surprise.
Did you consider the conscientious objector route?
I did, but only for a short term. My commitment to my country kicked in at that time because there were other guys that I heard were enlisting. They weren't waiting to be drafted. They were enlisting because they thought the communists had invaded Southeast Asia and we had to go over there and stop the communists. And that was the word that was out for all the draftees. Where you're doing your country a service.
Once you decided to go ahead with military service, how did your parents respond?
My dad was more receptive because he was in the World War II Navy,
Oh,
and he never had to go to war. He was stationed down in San Diego, but he was ended up being supportive. My mom was just never bought into the thing about me going to war and maybe not coming home. She never got on board. So, but Dad drove me to Los Alamitos to sign in for my boot camp. I didn't even know where Vietnam was. I had maybe heard the name Vietnam on the news every once in a while, but I was so wrapped up in college activities and athletics and student government and all of that. Vietnam, I never saw that as part of my future. And so I get the draft notice, and now I have to make a commitment to my country, which I did.
and at that point, then, did you start paying more attention to what was going on in Vietnam?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because they told me when I joined Naval Air Reserves, hey, we're going to put you on a Marine amphibious assault aircraft carrier. It has only helicopters, and you are going to have a battalion of Marines that are counting on you to get them in country and supply them and get them back. And that was our function. And we worked hand in hand with the Marines on the ship. I mean, um, there was a an attachment of Marines assigned to our ship that weren't part of the combat battalion, and they ran the brig, and they did very. They were the shore patrol on the carrier. They took care of the policing action,
Sure.
and so I got to make friends with a lot of the people, and the Marine captain that was in charge of the ship's Marines and I got to be very good friends, and we ended up together on the ship. My second tour over was as a senior air controller, and he was sitting next to me, and I was next to the air boss. And the air boss walked in to talk to the captain. There were four of us on the same, in the control tower on a carrier.
You're making your way, you're heading west toward Vietnam, and suppose you're in the galley talking with another sailor, and that sailor says, "So what is this all about? Why are we going to Vietnam? Why are we bringing all these Marines to Vietnam? What is this all about?" Before you've experienced Vietnam yet, what do you think you would have said at that time?
I would have, if nobody ever asked me that, but if they had, I would have said, I have no clue. I don't have all the facts. All I know is that we're here and we're going to Vietnam,
Yeah,
and reality sets in. I mean, and so you're on the ship, you're headed to war, and everybody on the ship knew that. So
yeah. So at that
deal with it.
time, so far as you recall, then at that time, communism really wasn't something that figured in your minds, like, we're going
No,
to fight the communists
not at all.
thing. Yeah. So unlike most veterans who will get off a plane and set foot in Vietnam, and then I'll ask them, what was your first impression of Vietnam? Your experience is a bit different. You approached Vietnam from the sea, but what was your first experience of Vietnam?
Um, the heat and the humidity. And because we were offshore, we were only like 2 miles offshore from the DMZ.
And what was the first thing you saw, heard, experienced that really drove home to you that you had arrived in a war zone?
We got offshore at night, and I'm not sure I knew it was dark. I don't know what time, but I'm sitting out on the flight deck, and I'm just looking at the stars and everything as we get our position on the DMZ area. And all of a sudden, I see these tracer shots coming out of the sky. And it's what we called back then Puff the Magic Dragon. And it was converted DC-3 into the military version. And they had a huge Gatling gun with huge bullets, huge shells, not just bullet shells. And it spun around, and like every sixth shell was a tracer, and it lit up. And so I could sit out there and I could see that, and my first thought was, oh my God, what if you're on the receiving end of that? That was my first impression.
Wow. Now you mentioned that later in your service you're a senior air controller. What is your job on this first tour? What are you doing?
They had me on the flight deck crew assisting the Marines into and out of the helicopters. So I was what they call a grunt on the flight deck.
So this first tour, you're helping Marines get on and off the helos as they're heading in. I'm wondering if you're able to bring, some of those images. It's of course a long time ago, but I'm wondering if you're able to bring some of those images to your mind's eye and describe what you see as you're watching the Marines coming toward you to get on that helo.
They were pissing in their pants. Seriously. And they were 18 and 19-year olds. They were shaking in their boots, pissing in their pants, and some were crying. I mean, you could tell they didn't want to be loaded onto that helicopter going to God knows where. And I watched them do that, and man, I teared up there. I'm tearing up a little now just thinking about that.
Hmm. So did you feel at that time, there's that, you mentioned the young men and the fear of going into battle. At that time, what was your own feeling? Did you feel like, I should be getting on that helo too with these guys? Was that feeling, man, I'm really lucky not to be getting on that helo? What was your own sense?
Well, when we first got there and we're loading them in, I just felt like I'm glad I'm going to be on the ship and I'm not going to be in that helicopter. And uh, and then after a couple of weeks of us resupplying them and bringing back the dead and the wounded on the helicopters, which I was a part of, and then I'm thinking totally different things about, yeah, I should probably be on there with them. I'm chuckling. I don't know why, but I thought I should probably be on there with them because I was carrying dead bodies off. And I was thinking, man, what did I do to help this guy? Carry his body bag?
It sounds like a version of what's called survivor's guilt.
Yeah, there was a bunch of guilt I carried for a long time.
And was that feeling of guilt, what I've heard so many times from other vets that, I should have been someplace I wasn't, or, like what I've heard a couple times, a guy goes on leave, a guy goes on R&R. While he's on R&R, there's a battle, a buddy is lost, and there's that feeling like I should have been there with my buddy to, is that the kind of thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing.
yeah. So you said in this first tour you're helping Marines, get on and off the helos. Um, and you've said a little bit about what you saw with the Marines getting on the helos. Did you notice over time, you mentioned that first time the Marines are getting on the helo, you can tell that a lot of them are afraid, which makes sense. Over time, did you see a kind of hardening in the Marines as you look in their faces, sort of that, that distant look you often associate with people who've been through combat?
More with the veteran Marines. Not so much with the rookie Marines that were the teenagers. I mean, they never got a crusty face on their, in their appearance. They just continued to be afraid. And, we all counted the number of days until we were home. We were all praying. I mean, not we, I mean, the ship's Marines were all praying before they got on the ship. And one thing, the captain of the Marines that was on our ship's crew uh, gave me some advice, and he said, don't make any friends with the Marines. Don't make any friends with them because a lot of them aren't coming back. And that was true.
Well, that is related to the next question. It's a harder question than the earlier one, and that is, you mentioned the Marines coming back. So they're coming back often from, having experienced battle, or they're coming back because they didn't, either they were wounded or they didn't survive battle. So as you bring those images to your mind now of the Marines coming back to the ship, what things do you see?
Well, the first tour over were our helicopters were smaller ones. They were the bubble front H-34s, and they only carried about 8 Marines in them. And if there were body bags in there, that not as many live wounded could be put in. So they usually brought the seriously wounded back to the ship, before the body bags, because the wounded need to be saved. And so um, the ones that were wounded that I was helping off, I would say they were mostly in shock. None of them were pissing their pants or crying coming back. They were already in the jungle, in the war. They'd experienced it, and they were living a new life now as war veterans, and God knows what that means.
Did you interact at all with these Marines, either as they're getting on or getting off the helo? Would you say
Yeah,
things to them?
yeah. Um, I said things to Marines when they first came aboard before Lieutenant Borquist, the Marine captain, told me don't make friends with them. So I didn't get that advice. And they're coming aboard, and I could see some of them were really shook up. And so I'd try to say, "Hey, welcome aboard." Try to make them feel better because they knew they were going to war. And so I did that, but no, afterwards, after that advice from Lieutenant Borquist, I didn't make any more contact with the Marines when they were getting off. When the wounded were getting off the helicopters, uh, I was not talking to them at all. All I was doing was, they were bleeding. Some were bleeding to death, and some died in my arms. And that's just war. You got blood all over. And you have to just mentally take your mind away from what you're seeing and what you're living. And I don't know if this is funny or not, I ended up singing songs to myself in my mind while I'm dealing with all the blood and guts. I just started singing Peter, Paul, and Mary songs, it and trying to put my mind at ease and take myself away and kind of be able to look down on what was going on instead of being a part of it.
Sort of detaching yourself. Yeah. You just mentioned Marines dying in your arms, and that's something that you've written as well. You say a few of the Marines defending Khe Sanh died in my arms as I'm helping them out of our medevac copters. Um, so I don't want to pry, but I'm wondering what you're willing to share about that.
Well, the first one, and this was in the first day, because these Marines, when they got flown into country, they were dying as soon as they landed. So we were bringing back dead and seriously wounded, the front guys that were on out patrols, we called them, and they'd come back, and they were bleeding profusely. Usually, they had bandages tied on them, but if you hit an artery or something, that bandage isn't going to save you. And so, uh, the first guy, because I was usually the first guy up to the carrier, not carrier, to the copter, and you call them helos, and we called them copters on the ship. But I was the first one up to look inside and tell the guys, okay, take this guy, take that guy. And there's one guy that's laying on the side of the interior of the copter, and he's just kind of rocking back and forth, and his let me see, he climbed onto me here. His right arm was gone, and it just that hit me. His right arm, I'm looking at that going, oh man, yeah, I can't even remember the thoughts going through my head then, but his right arm was gone. And he was the first guy that died in my arms. He just bled to death on the flight deck, right in my arms. And I had a few more that I was able to block that out better. But the first one always hits home, whether you're killing somebody or helping somebody.
Could you tell when he died? Did you know?
He just went limp. He went limp, and I had the guys come over with a carrier and take him down to the hangar deck, which our helicopter carrier, once we flew the Marines in, all the helicopters were up on the flight deck and the hangar deck was empty. So we converted the hangar deck to a hospital ship. So we'd take the wounded out of the copters, put them on a carrier, a stretcher, and take them down in the elevator from the flight deck to the hangar deck, where all the surgeons were there that they flew aboard from, I don't know where, I guess Da Nang. And we had cots laid up for surgeries right there. So
Wow.
the first guy didn't make it down there. I mean, but they took him off and carried him to the elevator, and he went down. And a lot of times they get to the hangar deck dead from the helicopter. They bleed out between the helicopter and the surgeon. My last temporary duty station was at Da Nang Air Base, and I was assigned to the control tower at the air base at Da Nang. Da Nang Air Base, I don't know if you've heard this, was the storage place for all the Agent Orange.
Mm.
And so I got flown into there. I subsequently and still have Agent Orange stage 3 cancer in my body. And as a result of my boots on the ground in Da Nang Air Base, I'm certain of that. And the VA has confirmed that, yes, your time on the ground there was the time when we were spraying the shit out of the jungles. And
Wow.
so
How long was it after the war that you began to notice things that were later identified as being related to Agent Orange?
it took a while. And I was shocked. And I later learned that that goes on a lot with vets that are sprayed with Agent Orange. It might go 20 or 30 years before the symptoms show up. And that was the case for me.
Lately, I've been asking veterans, what the war looks like from their perspective, because vets, they experience different aspects of the war. They're in different parts of the country. They have different jobs, and so the war looks different to them. Um, so I mean, for the Marines who um, are based at Khe Sanh, what the war looks like to them when the siege is taking place. The war looks like trenches and dirt and rats and filth and explosions. That's what the war looks like to them. Um, the war will look very different to somebody who's in Saigon, someone who's based in Saigon, for example. What did the war look like to you from the perspective of working on that helicopter ship, and then you have that last stint in Da Nang? What did the war look like from that perspective?
Very chaotic. And flying into Da Nang gave me more evidence of that. I didn't see the chaotic going on our ship because we're so regulated and restricted. We have certain jobs, but that Da Nang Air Base. You mean uh, uh, what I felt when I'm there watching these Marines go in and out of the airbase? That the last 10 days there, they were coming back, and like I said, getting off the helicopters coming back from Khe Sanh, they were in shock. They were still in shock. And I I had, the flight back home was on a C-130. We stopped at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines to pick up some more people, but it was a 17-hour flight on a C-130 with the bench seats.
Mm, yeah.
And so one of the guys in the control tower at Da Nang said, "Hey, before you get on your flight going home, Go to the ship store and buy yourself a fifth of something to drink and get shit faced before you get on that plane.
Yeah.
And I did, and I passed out, and that was my flight home.
Yeah.
Landing at SeaTac Airport in uniform was another experience.
Well, what was it? What was the experience?
Well, yeah, made the mistake of, well, I didn't have a choice. You had to be in uniform on the flight. And so we're getting off the flight and walking into the terminal at SeaTac, and there's a college protest going on, anti-war college protest, and I'm in uniform. One guy came up and actually spit in my face, and called me a baby killer. And I turned around and walked away. I didn't confront him. I walked into the terminal restroom, and I had my duffel bag with me with civilian clothes in it. I changed into my civilian clothes and walked out to catch my flight down to LA. And then I was discharged from Los Alamitos Naval Air Station.
What impact did that have on you? I guess, I'm asking in different times. I mean, what impact did that have on you immediately, and then maybe over the next day, and then over the years as you thought back on it, what this person had done?
I disregarded it. I didn't let it affect me. Um, I just said, "Hey, I'm here to go home," and so I went in, changed my clothes, and I went home. You hear more about other people experiencing that too, and this was, I got off in 1968. I got off the plane in the USA in August of 1968 when the anti-war protests were at their peak. Remember the Democratic Convention where they disrupted that, and
Sure.
all this stuff. Martin Luther King assassinated, Robert Kennedy Jr. assassinated. So much stuff going on. So I just blocked it out of my mind. I got back home. Dad picked me up at the Los Alamitos Air Base, drove me home, and another interesting thing, he didn't ask me anything. He just said, "Welcome home." And what a great greeting for vets to hear that coming back from war. Welcome home.
And when you're home now and you're going to junior college and then you're going to our community college and then you go to Cal State Fullerton, did you ever talk about your time in Vietnam with other students?
Never, because there were so many protests going on campuses that I was. It was totally different than when I was at Orange Coast College and I was big man on campus. Hey, the student body, this, that, athlete, all that, and then I get to Cal State Fullerton. Well, I get back to Orange Coast College even, and they're protested Orange Coast College, and I just kept my mouth shut. I went to school to take my classes, do that, and go work at the liquor store at night, and then give flight instruction in my new Cessna 150. And that was that.
As you look back on it now, what impact did that have on you that you have all of these experiences in Vietnam and then you come home, you face hostility, some of it direct, most of it indirect in the form of protests. And then alongside that is just a general indifference. Um, and maybe initially that general indifference isn't a problem because, I don't want to talk about it, but as you look back, I mean, what impact did all that have? That I experienced all this in Vietnam, then I come home, there are the protests. Nobody seems to care that I was even over there. No one's asking me about it. No one's showing any interest. As you look back on that now, what impact did all that have?
I didn't want to talk about it. So that was fine with me. If they don't want to talk to me, I didn't want to bring it up. And so that was just another reason. And in the college classes, there were a few people that could see I was ex-military. I was older than they were. First of all, I was getting out in my 20s, and they were teenagers going to college, and so they look at me like, "Who is this guy? What's he here for?" Blah blah blah. So a few of the more curious ones came up and said, "Were you in the war?" And I would just say something, yeah, and then that was that. I wouldn't have a conversation with them about that. That never came up with me. I never wanted to talk about it. My parents, my brothers never asked me about it. And I don't think that was just in my family. I think that was in a lot of families. They don't want to know. They don't want to know what you've been through. And and that's sad. I mean, they sent me there. I mean, the system sent me there. And now I'm supposed to come back and live a normal life again, and that's never going to happen. And I didn't even go to Quezon or Hue, but I knew our guys went there and came. Some came back and some didn't. And I, I still reflect. That's stuff that never leaves your brain. It's embedded in there. Once you're a part of that experience, it's not something that you can just excuse. It never goes away.
How long was it before you realized that that things weren't going to go back to the way they were before you went to Vietnam? You used a phrase earlier. You said that, you know, war veterans find themselves living a new life as veterans. How long was it before you realized that, yeah, I'm not going to be able to shake this Vietnam thing. It's with me. Um, and the reason you know that is because it's causing you to do things or, you know, think things. Uh, was that was it pretty quick that you realized
Yeah.
that
Yeah. The first day I went back to college at Orange Coast College, I realized that things were totally different. They weren't ever going to be the same for me because I was going back to the college where I was the big man on campus 4 years earlier. And these kids didn't even know me. They didn't know, and not that that was important to me, but I knew it was going to be different because I my day had changed in going to Orange Coast College from before being drafted, nice lifestyle on campus, to after coming home and getting to class, walking through the protests. And I knew right away I'm never going to shake this. I'm never going to be the same. You you stuck it in my brain, and there's no way to get it out.
looking back then, and you know, you said at the beginning of this the discussion that your parents were pacifists and that you had been raised with that outlook. There was opposition not to Vietnam specifically, but to war in general. Looking back, if you could run the tape over again, would you go to Canada? Would you be a conscientious objector?
I'd be a conscientious objector, not knowing what that means today. Really, uh, my parents actually, my mom wanted me to go to Canada. She had friends in Canada, and she had already set it up for me. If I chose, she let me make my decision. She said, "It's your life," and I chose not to go to Canada. Back, the patriotism kicked in, like I said earlier. When I got drafted, I just, okay, my country is calling me to serve. And I did.
Now, I think I know the answer to this question. You know, the question is when you look back on your tours in Vietnam, what is you know, the strongest memory, the memory that most stands out? And I think I know the answer to that question. It's this Marine
Yep.
who dies in your
Yep.
arms.
Undoubtedly. Yeah.
So we account for that one. Um, is there another like if I say, okay, well, what are the top two? And so then we account for that one. Is there another memory that is not as strong, but that is also there from time to time?
Yeah. There was somebody that had taken a grenade in his gut, and he was the second guy that died in my arms. He wasn't actually in my arms. I was pulling him out, and as I got him out, he collapsed on top of me. I took my grandson back to DC to the
Mm.
War Memorial, the wall, and had a good friend in high school growing up with him, good friend. And he was killed in Vietnam in 1968 when I was there. He was in the Army. And Michael R. Mangan, I, I ran
I
my fingers across his name.